It's a live show watched by 5 billion people for 30 years. Truman's World. Truman, who was just born, was put into a heavener by the director. All this only Truman doesn't know. When he leaves the house in the morning, Truman says the same thing to his neighbors. He goes to the newsstand to buy a newspaper, and every time he met a twin brother, he'd say hello to Truman. The twins would take Truman to a billboard on the wall and talk to him. This was actually a deliberate arrangement by the director's team. The colleagues around him were actually monitoring Truman's behavior. Until one day, Truman accidentally met his father on the street. Truman was about to have a chat with his father. The director's team, noticing the anomaly, acted quickly before his father could say anything. He was taken away by some man. Truman went after him. First, a group of runners surrounded Truman. Then a hotel bellhop crashed into Truman. And finally a cab appeared out of nowhere and blocked Truman. When he got home, Truman told his mother about the day he met his father. She told Truman that his father had died a few years earlier. Gladys was Truman's first girlfriend in college, but the director had already arranged for Truman to marry Mary. In order to tell Truman the truth, Gladys took Truman to a beach where there were no cameras. Just as Gladys was telling Truman the truth, a couple of guys took Gladys away. Truman put together a picture of Gladys from a magazine. Sitting in front of the TV, Gladys was also watching Truman's life. Truman felt like he was being followed no matter what he did. Truman found a staff lounge hidden in the elevator. Truman was dragged out of the elevator by the staff. His mother and wife showed Truman pictures of him from his childhood to assuage Truman's suspicions. Truman saw his wife's fingers crossed in a wedding photo. Truman followed his wife to the hospital. The operation was arranged but still revealed the flaws. Truman asked a travel agent to arrange a trip to Fiji. The travel agency told Truman there would be no flights for 3 months. Truman decided to take a long-distance bus instead. The bus driver told Truman that the bus had broken down and wouldn't start. The TV audience is wondering if Truman will ever get out of Havana. Truman wants to drive himself. Truman wants to drive out of Havana himself. There's a traffic jam on a road that's usually deserted. With no hope of escape, Truman stayed in Havana. Every day, Truman greeted his neighbors with good morning, good afternoon, and good night. And then he meets his twin brothers on the corner. And then he's pressed up against the wall to say hello. Truman's day-to-day life was still under the watchful eye of the cameras. Until one day, the crew found Truman lying motionless in his bed. When the crew came to the house to check on him, they realized that Truman had disappeared. Truman's sudden disappearance immediately drew the attention of fans around the world. The director turned on a searchlight disguised as a moon to look for Truman. The crew also launched a carpet search. Truman appeared on the sea in a sailboat. He is on his way to find his first love, Gladys. Gladys in front of the TV, smiling happily. The director tries to scare Truman off with a storm. The sailboat loses control in the storm. The mast was struck by a lightning bolt. Truman fell into the water. Just when everyone thought Truman must have drowned, Truman climbed back on board. Truman climbed back on board. The crowd in front of the TV started cheering. The crowd in front of the TV started cheering. The angry director turned the storm up to full blast, and a huge wave comes crashing in. The sailboat is knocked over by the waves. Truman falls into the water and doesn't move. The director shuts down the storm, and the sun comes out. The sun came out, and Truman, who was lying on the boat, slowly woke up. Truman went to the mast and hoisted the sails. Shortly after, Truman's sailboat crashed into a wall. Truman touched this strange wall with his hand. So this is the border of Havana. But Truman still couldn't get out. Along the edge of the wall, Truman walks to a staircase, and as he's about to exit, Truman hears the director's voice. Truman says, "Everything's a lie." And the director replied, "You're real. The outside world is no more real than the one I created for you. There are the same lies, the same deceptions." The director tries to make a last-ditch effort to stay. "In my world, you don't have to be afraid of anything. I know you better than you know yourself." Truman still insists on leaving. "You can't put a camera in my head." Truman says his final goodbye to the director. Truman walks out of the Havana. Gladys runs out the door. Happy, the crowd in front of the TV started cheering to celebrate Truman's freedom. In the face of all the difficulties and challenges of life, do we have the courage to go after what we really want instead of being swayed by the outside world?